Welcome to Spirits of Whiskey. We explore the wide world of whiskey through the many colorful personalities who make it, promote it, write it, and more.
With each podcast, Kerry Moynahan, a certified Bourbon Steward and Bartender, and yours truly, Philip Dobard, Director of the Cocktail Collection, interview whiskey's most important names.
From high-profile makers, blenders, and ambassadors,
to out-of-the-way innovators and remote pioneers.
Join us as we discover the people and elements that give the water of life its spirit.
Today we speak with former professional ballerina-turned-whiskey entrepreneur, Allison Parc. But first, stay tuned for this week's Whiskey Chronicles.
Thank you for joining us on this Whiskey Wednesday, May 27th, 2020. You're listening to Episode 4 of Spirits of Whiskey. First up is Whiskey Chronicles. World Whiskey Day was just a week and a half ago, and already some are looking forward to National Cognac Day, which is coming up on June 4th.
The origins of cognac date to the 16th century, when the Dutch visited the Cognac region of France to purchase wood, salt, and wine. They found it difficult, however, to preserve the wine on the journey back to Holland, so they started distilling the wine into brandy.
Today, brandy is made all over the world, but only brandy made in Cognac, France, under the strictest guidelines, can be called cognac. For example, per their regulations, cognac must be aged for at least 30 months in French oak coming primarily from Limousin and Tosse forests in central France.
While most Scotch whiskies are aged in ex-sherry-filled Spanish oak casks or second-fill bourbon barrels, or some combination thereof, one French single malt whiskey has made its mark by aging its whiskey exclusively in both new French Limousin Oak and Cognac casks. This gives the whiskey a vastly different flavor profile than Scotch, bourbon, or really any other international whiskey.
Today we interview founder of Brenne Whisky, Allison Parc, to learn how the evolution of her whiskey has come to be.
With us today on Spirits of Whiskey is Allison Parc. Allison is president and founder of Brenne, which is a single malt French whiskey. Welcome, Allison.
Thank you. This is so fun. I love that you all started this.
Oh, thank you. Okay, well, our first question, we generally ask about people's whiskey journey, but yours, I feel, is a little bit more intriguing. I mean, you first started off as a professional ballerina. So can you tell me about that and how did that lead into your whiskey journey?
Most people, I think, like the image of like standing at the ballet bar as if it was a bar who were not in point shoes slugging whiskey.
Yeah, you were doing a pot of whiskey one day.
Exactement. It was my favorite of the duets. The Art of Fermentation, I believe that piece was called.
Invitation to the Dram.
Yeah. Oh, this is going to be great. Oh, my goodness. Here's the wonderful thing about, being a professional ballerina, which in many ways is being a professional artist and also a professional athlete. Mm-hmm. And you are straddling both worlds simultaneously. And in the athletic department, part of it is keeping your body as trim and sharp as as possible, right? This is your tool. So we lived this life of restriction, right? Restriction on social life, restriction on food, and
there's a better than fair measure of deprivation involved in the professional dance.
Yeah. So I joke that when I finally came out of the tutu era and got to the actual bar, B-A-R, not B-A-R-E, I couldn't just imbibe. I had to go all the way and actually start making this stuff myself. So, I was a late bloomer. I could not figure out how to drink, and I felt very awkward socially. All my other peers at 23 years old had been drinking for a little bit of time.
Yeah, there were plenty of people willing to teach you.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's, you have some laughs, but then you kind of whisper to your friends, well, how many are too many? And they're like, oh, you just have to know your limits. I'm like, how do you know your limits? They're like, didn't you go to college? Yeah. But
meanwhile, you're like 98 pounds at the time, probably.
Right, exactly.
And there's nothing to absorb all of this spirit.
Exactly. A thimbleful of whiskey would have just, had you flat out. But no, dancers have a remarkably high tolerance to pain and I would think metabolism. So yeah, I don't know. So anyhow, so I was a really late bloomer to drinking, and then I was very actually a little afraid of it. I was afraid of in my mid-20s having this kind of experience that a lot of people in their late teens, early 20s have, that kind of like learning your limits with alcohol. Mm-hmm. So instead of just drinking for the sake of drinking, I really wanted to understand the craft, and I started doing a lot of research. And then at the time, I had tried some whiskey and I was like, oh, I'm sorry, what was that? that was delicious. So I just went down this like total road of learning and studying, and my whole family is scientists. So it was very easy for me to understand like the chemical analysis of a distillation run and things like this. Cause I could just show up to Thanksgiving and be like, hey, like talk to me about ester molecules. And they were like, okay. I also love it because it to me is the perfect blend of art and science, right? And so if ballet is art and science to me is athleticism, right? It was, physics and, understanding like circumference. I don't know. It's just like a lot of amazing ways that I would like break down movement into like centrifugal force for a pirouette or something like that. That to me, whiskey was science and art, and it was the art of the science that I found so compelling, because I don't feel like there's that much art in vodka, and rum was a very different conversation back then. And tequila at that time wasn't really focused on sipping tequilas. It was very much like, take a shot and go dance on a table. So whiskey had this really beautiful story and all these beautiful stories and this like symbolic way of drinking it. And it was very mindful. And I just love the idea that you could pour something in your glass that had been made 15 years prior. So I don't know. I love, and I feel like ballet is this art that you consume immediately with your audience in the moment. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like drinking a really good glass of whiskey.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I would agree. Many years ago, in my first career, I was an opera singer. So I know a fair bit about, being, part artist, part athlete.
Yes.
Although opera singers aren't, they are thinner these days, but the same degree of svelte is not expected of them.
Right, but you're still your body is still your tool.
Yes, indeed. So, indeed, you are an athlete who has developed artistry.
So, Allison, once you decided that whiskey was where it's at,
how did you end up in France?
Oh, I didn't mean to.
You took a right at Iceland. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. I was like, wait a minute. They're speaking the language of plié and grand battement. I can be here. I really did not intend to ever have my own whiskey company. My second dream was to be an importer. And I was like, I'm going to import and really be the conduit into the U.S. for enchanting whiskey companies made outside of Scotland. So I wanted to focus on world whiskeys. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And then when I started visiting a lot of these distilleries, and again, in the early 2000s, there weren't many. So you could count basically on one hand the number of, world whiskey distilleries at that time. And I was like, cool. I would sit down with them and they would, whether they were doing a peated or an unpeated expression, right? They would basically have what their version of like who they thought their main competitor was in Scotch. Mm-hmm. And they would pour blind tasted a peated or unpeated Scotch with their peated or unpeated, whatever was complementary to what they were making. And they're like, can you taste the difference? And quite often I couldn't. I could understand that there was a difference in the two whiskeys in the glass, but I couldn't tell you which one was theirs, which one was Scotch and which one wasn't. And that was a real source of pride, right? And we've seen that celebrated in the awards and all these things. I'm going, no, you all are wrong. Stop it. Stop the music. Nope. You got the score wrong. That's not the piece we're doing. But I really wanted to see, don't make something that the Scotch have already been able to do. do something that is original and unique and intentionally is different and different with respect to tradition, but use stuff that's local and indigenous to wherever you're making this, because A, that'll make it interesting, and B, like there's no reason to compete with Scotch. We can all have a place in the playground, you know?
Right.
So they all thought I was crazy, and I was basically realizing what I was asking for was terroir and a sense of provenance in single malt whiskeys made outside of Scotland. And no one was doing it the way I saw possible, and no one wanted. I kept giving my idea away. Do this. You own the brand. I'll start the import company. I'll just like shuffle it, you know, I'll just basically make some sales for you is really what I was offering. I'm so glad everyone turned me down. I probably would have been unemployed a long time ago. So thank God everyone said no to me. And then I was like, oh, this is silly. I'm just asking people in the wrong place. And I was like, let me go to France. I bet the French will want to do this because terroir is their thing. They're the number one Scotch consumer per capita in the world, which no one in the English-speaking countries are even talking about.
Right.
You know, I mean, all these reasons. They have Calvados, Armagnac, Cognac, very rich distillation history. Okay, this is good. So, you know, when I went, there was only 4 guys making whiskey there before me, and one of them welcomed me into his distillery, and he was like, oh, that's a really nice idea. No, go back to New York, little girl. You don't know what you're talking about. You know, and I almost feel like I'm like, you know, Molly Shannon, and she would like put her, you know, her hands underneath her armpits and like make that pout sound, right?
Mary
That's
Catherine Gallagher.
Yes. I felt like that character, like,
yes,
no one understands me, and like, you know, like frustrated and like pulled in.
Right,
So
right.
thankfully someone in France said, oh, there's a guy in Cognac. He seems as bizarre as you are. You guys might want to know each other. Yeah.
So,
So eventually,
this homme bizarre took you in.
Exactement. Yeah. Not only did he take me in, he took me in, he showed me everything that he could do, which was exactly what I wanted. Make a whiskey using entirely local indigenous ingredients. We got the added benefit of being able to be certified organic. And I was like, this is great. You want to be business partners? Like, this is awesome. And he was like, no. Excuse me? I was like 24, you know? And he's a 3rd generation cognac maker. He was 28 years old at the time. And I swear he acted like he was 56 to my 24. Like, like we could, like, there were some things we could see eye to eye on, and like other things I was like, are you my dad? Like, what are you saying right now? And he was like, I was like, okay. And every other no before that moment, I had taken it as an opportunity to prove to them why they should do business with me, which always got me another no. Right. And I didn't know if I was getting no's because I was American, because I had no experience in this industry before, because I was a woman, because I was young, like because of just how I was holding myself in a meeting, which I still to this day think was pretty darn professional. But so when I met my napster, I thought, okay, Allison, like, why don't you change your ways a little bit? So when he said no to me, instead of being like, come on, this is what I can do, like this is my distribution model, this is this. I just said to him, I was like, cool. I accepted his no right with him in the moment. And I was like, what do you want to do? And that, I think, single-handedly changed my life.
Wow.
And it allowed him to say, I just want to be the farmer and the distiller. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? Like, I can own the whole business can be mine. It's my little empire. And yeah, so he's my partner, but not even in terms of like shares of the business. He doesn't want any of that. So
that's exceptional.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
And you're not going to find that in very many places.
No. But I also think, like, you know, it was taking a beat to recognize, like, Americans, we love business. We're super driven. We like owning things. Like, you know, it was important for me.
Equity is where it's at.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And it was important for me to step into another culture. And equity isn't where it's at in the south of France. Quality of life is where it's at. Maintaining freedom and to let your kids run through your organic vineyards and like own your property and not have a Diageo come in and like buy it out from under you. I have offered this guy more times than I can count so much money, and he won't take it. Like, he doesn't want to be a part of the expansion. He just wants his original role. He wants to farm, he wants to distill, and I can do whatever the heck else I want to do.
I say count your blessings along with your money.
Yeah.
Oh, I do. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really special. I mean, we fight like brother and sister. We like love each other, and we can't understand each other sometimes. Like, we just get so frustrated with the other, but then we're always able to get back to, what do you value? What do I value? How can we stand together in this?
Are you fluent in French?
Nope.
And how about he in English?
We're fluent together in franglais.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. And I think,
All right.
I think that's ultimately what's also saved our relationships.
When he finally said, okay, if you do the business and I do the farming, how long before things started rolling, and what year was that?
Gosh. So luckily when I met him, he had already had a version of, it wasn't Brenne as we know it today, but it was a whiskey that he was making there. And it gave us the ground for what would become Brenne. So we worked another 4 years. So basically he had 4-year-old juice as the oldest barrels at the time, 4-year-old, 3-year-old, 2-year-old, 1-year-old. I could taste the progression of it. And I thought, whoa, this guy really needs someone to come in and put a program together for the maturation. Like, there was no organization, there was no commonality really, and no structure. So what was great is that, again, he wanted to farm and distill. He let me be the person to say, this is what we're doing with these barrels. And the crazy thing is, we got an international contract attorney. We wrote up our agreement. I went back to France. We were signing it together in person. And he just looked at me and he was like, oh, Allison, I just need some money. And I was like, oh, like, yeah, that makes sense. By the way, I never took a business class, let alone like went to business school, or like now there's entrepreneurial school, which is wonderful, but that did not exist. My college degree is in jazz hands. So I was like, oh yeah, money.
because you had magic to do.
Thank you. Yes. And nothing relieves a tense business moment like a little kickball change in a sparkly jazz hand. They remember you as you sing "Make 'Em Laugh" and shuffle out the door.
Oh, that's great.
So he was like, oh, I just need some money, and I was like, yeah, of course, I was like, how much money do you need? And he says, oh, $86,000. And I was like, oh no, 82. Sorry, he said 82,000. That's what he said. And I was like, is that like dollars or euros? He's like, dollars is fine. I had $86,000 in my savings account. And I was like, so if you get this money, you're good? Like, you'll sign the contract? And he's like, yeah. And basically that $82,000 secured my entire access to all the whiskey that he had made and will ever make. It's like the most incredible investment in my life. And
amazing.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And so he couldn't make whiskey for anyone else in the world. He couldn't sell this whiskey to anyone. It was like, it was mine, right? And it wasn't like that was the value of the whiskey. That was just like this arbitrary number that he decided to throw out that I happened to be able to have. So I wired in my life savings, and I started putting a barrel program together. So we worked together for another 4 years with these barrels to find some sort of uniformity and like figure out what makes sense for this distillate, because it's a very different style of single malt. And so then I was side hustling in jewelry. It was during the recession, 08, 09. So in 2010, I quit my job and I hustled. I actually, funny enough, did end up importing and exporting whiskeys. I exported American craft whiskeys, and I had imported some bulk international whiskeys for some craft distillers in the U.S. So really interesting things. Nothing that I put my name on or was public about, but it allowed me some additional income. And then in 2012, I finally had like put the whiskey in bottles, had my TTB approval, like figured out how to do FDA treated pallets, like actually bring my own stuff into the US. So, And
Right.
here was the very first single malt in the entire world that was made seed to spirit in the Cognac region of France. The first single malt made anywhere in the world that was aged exclusively in new French oak and Cognac barrels. It is the first single malt in the world that tastes like bananas, Foster, creme brulee, and blueberry muffin tops, right?
Let's not leave out bubble gum,
And
which
so
is one
much
of,
bazooka bubble
one of the
gum.
things I adore about Brenne.
Yeah.
Yeah, that like the baseball bubble gum, like the trading card bubble gum. The weird thing too was I didn't know how to even talk about my role in this, and I hadn't considered myself in this. I was so focused on the whiskey that the world kept saying, "Well, who are you?" And I was like, "Oh, I imported it because I had, right?" And they were like, "Well, who's making it?" I was like, "Well, I am." And they're like, "Well, you're not the importer." I was like, "No, I'm the importer." And they're like, "Well, you also own it, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Okay, so you're the owner." I was like, "Yeah, okay, yeah, I am, yeah." Like, okay. And then I would take it to these distributors in New York, and I was like, "Hey, like this is really cool." I showed up to every meeting with like a beautiful presentation of how to launch a French whiskey in New York super successfully, like the whole brand plan of like all the collabs I wanted to do and like all the bars and restaurants and like the areas and the neighborhoods that was right. I brought little samples of Yamazaki 12, Brenne, and Balvenie Doublewood to show, right? This is what a scotch aged in 2 different barrels, how it's like radically opened so many doors for people. And like everyone loves Balvenie Doublewood. Great. So technically we're doing something similar, but our flavors are very different and unique, and we're not copying. We're different, right? And then here's a
Right.
Yamazaki 12 to show you like what the beautiful range of international whiskeys are. And everyone took the samples and everyone said, "Oh my God, great presentation. Can I keep this?" And I was like, sure. I can't wait to hear from you. Never heard from them. They never call. You know, it was like I was like hearkening back to my dancer days of like just standing in a line and not even being allowed to dance. They just look at you and decide if they want you or not.
Yep, like showgirls.
Exactly.
So let's take it up a level, and then let's take it back down. So tell us about French whiskey. We know it's a thing. Kerry and I know it's a thing, but many people, even a lot of committed whiskey people, either don't know that it's a thing or they don't readily associate the country with whiskey making. Because frankly, brandy making, Cognac, Armagnac, Calvados, and just eau de vie that are made outside of those regions, you know, that's when people think French spirits, that's what they think.
Correct. Yeah, I was about the 5th person there making whiskey. And now there's over 65 distilleries in France registered to make whiskey.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I hope we will see a boom in these brands. I think it was very helpful for Brenne to quickly have an international stage because I am myself American. So it came to the US first. US and UK share the same media outlets and things like that. So if you are able to get enough of a spike in the US, it piques the interest in the UK. So you can kind of quickly build those 2 markets. And then from there, it expands out to just other whiskey interested places.
What's the origin of the name? Brenne. It certainly sounds as though its provenance is French.
Thank you, because it in my heart, it should sound French. It should give the impression of being French. Really what the word is I butchered the actual French word. And this is my butchering. This is how I was pronouncing the word for the part of the barley that you use to make whiskey. I would always pronounce it Brenne, and my distiller would be like, it was spelled Brin.
Brun.
Brun, exactement. And I didn't know how to pronounce it back then. So I would pronounce it Brenne. And I would always tell my farmer distiller how beautiful his Brenne was growing. And he would just smile and roll his eyes. He's like, "Brun, Allison, the word is brun." And I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry."
Well, I have to say right here, I think it's a happy accident because, I think your weakness is your strength there because people around the world would have been saying Brenne, and
Exactly.
It is nowhere near as sexy as Brenne.
Why, thank you. Yeah. So I joke that it's the collision of American entrepreneur meets French farmer, and it's the origin of where the whiskey truly starts.
Good.
And
okay. Got it. Now we know. The simplest yet most brilliant branding move ever, I think. How'd you come up with that? The singular malt.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I wish I could say that came from my head. It did not. It came from other people listening to me, and clearly I have no problem articulating and talking at length. And so people just my team kept listening, and they were like, "Oh, Allison, this is what you've made." And then they in turn shared it with me, and I was like, that is amazing. Trademark that immediately. That is brilliant. So I'm proud to say we own the trademark on that. And I
very good.
I think our whiskey really is the singular malt.
Very good. Well, speaking of single versus more than single, how many expressions are in the market?
2.
Okay. All right. And how did you come upon what's the difference between the two?
Brenne to me is never, it is a living brand, right? And it's not a brand that it's not wide and flat. It's deep and narrow. So it's always going to be estate cask number 1. And then I envision it, maybe there's a second SKU that is also always available. Probably not, at least probably not when I'm running the company. And I think it's just going to have these beautiful side components, right? Brenne 10 is an annual release. We do 300 cases a year of it. So if you can get it, great. If not, so sorry. But Brenne is a estate cask, and then Brenne 10, right now it's ABV wise, estate cask is 40%, Brenne 10 is 48%. Brenne 10 sits in the barrels around 6 to 8 years, which in the microclimate of Cognac is basically equivalent to a maturation process of like 10 to 12 in Scotland. Just based on atmospheric pressure and humidity levels and things like that.
Again, perhaps you can't answer this, but might we see a cask strength release at some point?
So I've contemplated this a lot. Brenne at cask strength is fantastic. When I came out with estate cask, they were like, "Oh, you'll come out with cask strength next." And I if it's not clear already, I have a tendency to not do what's expected. So estate cask came out in 2012 when the Scotch industry was doubling down on age statements. 3 years later, in 2015, the Scotch industry started releasing non-age statements, and they were doing things like Phoenix and like all this stuff because the spike in consumers had happened, and they didn't think they had enough age stock to keep fulfilling on that pipeline. So at that time, when they leaned into non-age statements, I leaned into age, right? That's when I launched my Brenne 10. So cask strength is always a possibility. It's stunning. You do lose the floral notes on Brenne unless you know how to nurture them out with water, So to the experienced whiskey drinker, as you all are, that's a no-brainer. You'll figure it out as you experience and drink it. But like just as someone off the street, we're like, oh, okay, I'll just try this whiskey, and they don't necessarily know the ceremony around drinking a cask strength, they'll lose those notes. I get that that's true for every brand. I just care so much about our consumers' experience and trying to make it as easy as possible that I haven't been able to pull that trigger for myself yet.
Okay. Brenne is made in the heart of Cognac. That's a region and a brand that's well known. It's known the world over.
Yeah.
How does situating Brenne, both literally and figuratively, in that region and that global brand help and maybe hinder your efforts to develop a market for your whiskey?
Good question. Hinder comes to mind very quickly because I have walked into retail stores you pick a place in the US, and I see my brand sitting with cognacs. And I go, wait, no, it's a whiskey. It goes over here. So that is a constant game of education that me and my team play. Help, when you say I make whiskey in Cognac region, anyone, regardless of their knowledge and understanding of the spirits category as a whole, they go, oh, that makes sense. Right? And there's an immediate acceptance of, oh, this is probably of good quality. Because I know things that come out of Cognac France as being good quality. So that really has helped.
And the people who appreciate whiskey at a more granular level, when they learn that you're using Charente stills, for instance, rather than the traditional pot still, they're like, oh, okay, now I need to know more.
Exactly. Yeah. Once you like pick up the layer and you get really into the technical stuff, which is super fun, that I think for the whiskey nerds, myself included in that, I mean, I could talk forever about ester molecules and the fermentation techniques that we do. It's really cool.
So prior to the pandemic, you used to travel immensely for work, I'm sure. How much travel was it to France versus other places to promote?
So I launched Brenne in New York in 2012 and then expanded into the US. In 2015, when I launched Brenne 10 in the US, I launched in France. So France was 3 years after the US in getting Brenne to market. From 2015 onward, every production visit I do, I always make sure I tack on a market visit as well. But for the production stuff, I will go anywhere from, in a non-COVID year, 2 to 6 times a year, depending on what I'm working with. And then I travel, usually I can do anything from, 2 cities, a couple of times I've done three different states in a week, which I don't like to do that. But, I would say at minimum every other week, anywhere from 50 to 75% of the time.
You're traveling in and out of New York, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Other than being forced to stay at home more than you might, how has COVID-19 affected your business as in sales? Has off-premise made up for the loss in on-premise?
Not at all. For craft and emerging, we operate 50-50. So to suddenly have 50% of your revenues cut, luckily we're still here and our team is still intact, and we are very grateful for the innovation of our team, and our audience, our community is so freaking cool.
That's good.
They're
That's
really
good.
We are the cool kids, I'd say.
Yes. So we've been very
long
grateful.
last.
Yeah, I know, that's truth, right? I mean, thankfully, whiskey, I feel like, made us all very cool.
Cocktails. It's a multi-part topic, if you will. How do you like to experience your whiskey in cocktails, and what are your go-to cocktails? Built, shaken, or stirred? Vamp.
Going into this industry, I was such a whiskey purist that it took me a bit of time to get on board with cocktails. Yeah.
There's a Facebook group that's about incorporating fine, higher end whiskeys into cocktails.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that is where Brenne 10 would play, because Brenne 10 retails like 100, 120 on the shelf.
Okay.
So when I see people, very rarely, but it's fun when I see it, reach for it and do a cocktail with it, I'm like, oh. I lean in. I'm like, what? I own this whiskey. I make the whiskey. I don't know if I've ever made a cocktail with Brenne 10. So it's really fun. I'm so inspired by our mixology community, by our, at-home bartending community. I've seen some really creative things. I love Brenne, however, and like in a cocktail, however someone wants to show me their creation with it. I will try any Brenne cocktail people create, and it's with such honor, right? It really is, because it's like, I did all the work to get it to here, and if you can take it to an epic cocktail, I'm super humbled and honored. I love it in the sidecar.
Oh, I'm gonna try it in the sidecar.
The sidecar is awesome.
Delicious.
Sometimes I'll get a little Compass Box Peat Monster and a spray bottle and just spritz the top of my sidecar and call it a penicillin.
Ah.
Okay.
Yeah,
nice.
just like that's my winter version of my sidecar.
Okay.
I love
instead of absinthe.
Yeah,
instead of a spritz of absinthe.
Yeah. Oh, but now that you say absinthe, Sazeracs are really cool with Brenne. I'll drink those a lot.
I could imagine. I could imagine.
I may have to make that later. I picked up a bottle over the weekend, so I'm going to be playing with it.
We feel every bottle, truly. Like that's what COVID did to our business. We feel every single. We count them. We thank you. we will see that in our
You're
numbers.
welcome.
I appreciate it.
So what is next for the brand, and where you're going, and like once the pandemic is over,
I think our industry is radically changing, and I don't think it's going to go back to what it was. So Brenne is very keen on integrating into being a part of creating what is next, and working with our restaurants and our national accounts and our hotels and our bars to help them get back up and provide their needs in their adjusted economies. So that is my main focus right now. What are they going to need? How can we shift and produce for their needs? That is number one, my focus. So I think whatever my other plans were have all been tabled at this point, and I am arms wide open.
Well, Allison, we very much thank you for being on the show today. We had a great time.
Absolutely no fun at all.
I know, for me too. Boo.
Well, look, next time you're in LA, give us a call.
Yes.
We'd love to hang out. Please do call us if you're going to have any new releases that we need to help you get the word out on. So, all right. Well, thanks again. We'll talk soon.
World of Wheezy is up next. Stay with us. Hey, Louise, thanks for joining us today. As you know, we just spoke with Allison Parc from Brenne Whisky, and we wanted to know what you thought would be a good pairing or tasty morsel to go with her whiskey.
Well, it is good to be back with you, Kerry. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
This whiskey was a big surprise. I have never tasted anything like this before, that I can say with certainty. Everything from the beautiful blue label embossed with gold fleur-de-lis to the fact that a former ballerina created it, this whiskey screams France. I mean, I was telling my husband that even if I hadn't seen the label, hadn't seen the bottle, hadn't seen the gold color of the whiskey, if I were drinking it, I would feel like I was there. And so she managed, like, in that wanting to create that terroir, she like managed to do it for sure. So on that note, when I was tasting it, the caramel and the floral notes, they took me straight to like lounging in a park in the 9th arrondissement in springtime, where I'd be sipping this. I imagine this after a really great meal, and because of its like, the body is so light, I feel like I want it in springtime. I want to smell flowers around me. I want to drink it with a like big wedge of a triple creme brie, which is just, you know, it's not too funky. It's just creamy. It's a cow's milk brie, and you know, that with like a touch of fleur-de-sel and a big bowl of fresh cherries in the springtime and a nip of this whiskey sounds like pure heaven on earth to me.
Oh, that sounds definitely like pure heaven on earth. Well, great. Well, we appreciate your feedback, and I think I'm going to get myself a bowl of cherries and some brie and try that tonight. We will talk to you next week when we have our next guest on, and thank you so much for chiming in.
All right, looking forward to it. We'll talk soon.
Please visit our website to see our show notes on today's podcast at spiritsofwhiskey.com. That's whiskey with an E.
We'll include a link to where one can buy Brenne Whisky in our show notes, as well as a summary of Chef Louise's comments from today's World of Wheezy.
As always, you can see our upcoming topics and guest roster and links to past shows. Thanks for joining us.
Until next time, Salam.
Slanchava.
Spirits of Whisky is a production of First Reel Entertainment and the Center for Culinary Culture, home of the Cocktail Collection, and is available on Anchor, Spotify, and wherever fine podcasts can be heard.